You're listening to the Sea of Dragons podcast by XFL and Zone. Welcome into the Sea of Dragons podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Main. Episode 3, the aptly titled Kingdom of Zorn, is our most dragon-focused episode yet. We'll be joined by Dragons Weekly to talk about all 4 opening weekend games. But first we'll dive in deep into the Seattle Dragons to unearth and discuss some insights that may prepare you for things to come in XFL 2020. So sit back and relax and enjoy the episode. And thank you for joining us. Entering into the Dragons Keep this episode is Tyler Olsson from one of my personal favorite podcasts, Dragons Weekly. He does a great job and is an excellent listen, and he's here to talk XFL Kickoff 2020. Tyler, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. I couldn't be more excited to be here with you. You are one of my favorite listens as well. Any opportunity to chat Dragons is a good opportunity for me. So Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you bet. And I think it's safe to say we're both pretty fired up.
Pun intended, right?
So, big pun.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Well, so let's dive in and start with a little Dragon-centric. What are you most excited about with this Seattle team and the roster?
Yeah, I mean, what jumps out to me, and it might sound a little crazy here at first, but just seeing some live action, right? There's a lot of pontification and guesswork here behind the scenes as to, schematically what this team is going to look like and, play calling and all of that. And the league intentionally, I think, has done a really good job of trying to keep that under wraps as to not spoil that, first impression week one kind of thing.
Sure, more of a movie teaser.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of stuff.
And they've only got one shot at a first impression.
Yep.
So, they want to make sure that first, exposure for fans in that week one situation is going to be as representative as possible for the league. So, seeing live action, I want to see obviously the players that we've been reading about and learning about, and sometimes watching highlights of from previous teams.
Oh boy!
But yeah, the live action thing for sure is the biggest thing that jumps out to me.
One thing I've realized just recently, as the roster kind of settled and was announced, and looking at kind of the dynamics of the roster and how we have such a talented offensive line and a backfield, and the Dragons are perhaps built to run heavy and run quick. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm in lockstep with you there. I think, it was no secret, when they jumped into the skill position phase, their running back was going to be a key piece of the puzzle, right? They took Trey Williams and Kenneth Farrow really early on.
Very quickly.
I think that the 3 running backs that are here on the final roster all have their own unique skill set that they bring to the table, right? I think Farrow is kind of more of the traditional bell cow guy that has done it NFL, AAF, you name it, right? He's kind of been around the block. I'd expect him to carry the bulk of the workload. Trey Williams, I think, is an incredibly special athlete, maybe one of the most special in the league.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, offensive coordinator Mike Riley trying to get him in one-on-one situations in space as often as he can. And then Jaquan Gardner, I mean, call it a lazy comp, but, I can't watch him and not think Darren Sproles, right?
Sure, yeah.
The low center of gravity, super powerful, but still immensely quick at the same time. So I think, to your point, I think, yes, this is an O-line that has experience. It all hinges on them, communicating and playing together, like you said. But, skill set-wise, I think they've got a backfield that can absolutely run the football.
Farrell, Williams, and Gardner, they're all, to me, explosive. And Trey Williams, watching him play for the San Antonio Commanders, my word for him is electric. He's just one of those electric ball carriers, especially in the passing game. He gets the ball in his hand in open space, and he is really exciting, but all three of them are. So let's go with the wide receivers core now. What's the big thing that grabs your attention with the wide receivers?
Yeah, it's funny, when you look at the roster, and again, we're talking about different guys in different roles, that position, there's a lot of similarities, build-wise across that wide receiver room, right? The tallest wideouts are Alonzo Moore and Kason Williams at 6'1". Everybody else is, just under that 6 foot range. So to me, it's versatility, right? And I think that kind of transcends most of the roster as well. But there's so much athleticism. Oh my gosh!
Oh yeah,
that's the biggest thing for me.
It's going to be really interesting to see how they're implemented in this offense, and it just reeks to me that there's going to be a lot of quick hitters, and Brandon Silvers is a very accurate passer. I think that you're going to see this kind of run and kind of ball control pass, but get it out quick and get it into the hands of these players.
I completely agree. And, if this is going to be a true Jim Zorn West Coast offense, I think Brandon Silvers kind of plays the role of point guard, right? Is get it out quick, get it to these guys in space where they can make a guy miss and, continue the drive, move the chains. Keenan Reynolds is, to me, that's the most intriguing guy for me across the board. Former college quarterback. You can do a lot with Keenan Reynolds. I think the rules really lend itself to him more than anybody else in the offense. But super talented again, like you said. And Dontez Byrd, a late addition. What kind of a role is he going to play? But it's a fascinating position group, no doubt.
I love Byrd. I was super excited when he came aboard. But going back to Keenan Reynolds, he is the Dragons X factor. That guy that can run, pass, and catch. And you look at someone like Quentin Flowers, and there's other people sprinkled about the league. And we have perhaps a few more of those people. So let's transition to the quarterback. You mentioned Silvers. Let's talk about B.J. Daniels. What do you think about the quarterback combo and what that's going to look like?
Man, that's the other guy for me too that I'm so excited about because for my money, I think they're both going to get time, especially early on in the year.
I do
right?
too.
Yep. And if B.J. Daniels is not playing, I think that means only that Brandon Silvers is lighting it up and they don't want to, have him cool off on the sideline. But, B.J. Daniels is, to your point, Quentin Flowers, two South Florida guys, by the way, which is kind of unique. But, Daniels is not the traditional stand in the pocket guy, right? Not to say you can't spin it because he can.
He can. But I hear you, yeah.
Yeah, he's athletic enough to play wide receiver in the NFL. He's going to be what I would anticipate as kind of they're going to have a package for him, right? The extra point with no kicking, right? I would imagine he's going to be in there quite a bit. Run pass options. Heck, Silvers and Daniels could be on the field at the same time for some double pass situations. So creativity to the max. I think he's going to play a lot.
Yeah, and, with traditional football, which is pretty much what most football kind of is or resembles, this double forward pass brings in a complexion, but we're so traditionally used to saying, oh gosh, two quarterbacks, there's a quarterback controversy. And because of not only the rules, but also because of what type of players each one of these guys is, I think it's going to be more of a quarterback collaboration, kind of like what you were just saying. B.J. Daniels is going to come in there. He's going to be part of that offense, whether it's coming in and being a decoy that, you have to guard against the double forward pass and say the flat or a jet sweep or something like that. But, this isn't just a one-man show all day long.
The more you can do, the more you're going to play. That's the way the league is set up and the rules are set up.
Yep.
There's a reason why Daniels was still the guy, with kind of a revolving door throughout the offseason. Him and Silvers were the two most constant presences. They're on the field, and I think they're both going to be rewarded with playing time.
Yep. So let's talk about some of the other receivers, blockers we have on the offensive side of the ball. How about the 5-man tight end group?
Yeah, 5 tight ends, right? And that's what jumps out to me is, so Evan Rodriguez was a really highly thought of guy coming out of Texas Tech. before going into the NFL. He's the smallest one on the roster at 6'2", 249.
Yeah.
Right? So, again, versatility is big. The tight end position, I think, bodes well for special teams as well, which is probably why they're carrying 5 guys, man. And if we're talking about running the football as effectively as we want to, I think there's going to need to be a rotation, and guys are going to have to block.
At first, I was surprised with the 5 tight ends, and my analytical brain went to work. So about 15 minutes later, after looking at, hey, we're carrying 5 tight ends, I'm like, okay, it just confirms that whole thought about we're going to run the ball. But then also you have Connor Hamlet, Ben Johnson, and Jeter. You have Evan Rodriguez, who, like you were just saying, he is a explosive, big-bodied receiver. We seen what he could do in 2-point conversions in the AAF and what he could do in the red zone. So those 5 guys, I think, all have a role. Cam Clear being the other one, and he's a guy that actually could shift in and be an emergency tackle. He's a big dude, but he also can catch the ball. I watched him make some nice plays in the receiving game for the Commanders.
To add one little tidbit to that as well is, again, from an extra point standpoint, short yardage kind of situation, I'm imagining, Daniels as that short yardage quarterback with different options, right? RPO type stuff. Maybe it's just a true keeper for him, but give me 3 of those big dudes, as a tight end, maybe one of them motioning across the formation. Yeah. And I'll take my chances with B.J. Daniels to get 1 or 2 yards. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that might actually create some scheme fit problems with the opposing defense.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree. I think that's a very intriguing position group as far as how they're going to be deployed each and every game. But I mean, they all are, like you said.
Yeah, I think so. So let's flip to the other side of the ball. Let's flip to the defense. What are your thoughts on the Dragons defense?
Yeah, so when you look at the players on the roster the same way with the offense, right? Versatility is going to be big. My question is, who is Clayton Lopez, the defensive coordinator? He's a DB's coach through and through, but his most recent coaching job in the pros was 2013 with the Raiders, and his most recent coaching job was coaching the Cayman National Flag Football team.
Yeah.
So, what's the scheme, right? It looked to me at that mini camp event that we were able to attend that a 4-3 base might be his preference, just with the team sessions for the defense. But there's a lot of unknowns here. Obviously he's highly thought of by Coach Zorn, which is why he's here. But yeah, I mean, if there's one thing you'd like to think is that at least technique-wise, the DBs are going to be coached up really well, as he also holds that title, and he was a college DB. But yeah, other than that, that's a big question mark. We're going to have to find out.
Let's jump in and talk D-line and linebackers. Tell us your thoughts on the front 7.
With a 25-second play clock, the defense has got to be, I mean, everybody on that defense has to be in the best shape of their lives, right? And so from a front 4 standpoint, if they do indeed run predominantly a 4-3 front 7 schematic, there's going to be a lot of different D linemen rotating in and out. I think the biggest name for me that I'd want to keep an eye on is Stanley Maponga, just because, he was the first pick during that phase of the draft, experience-wise and so on. But I think, to me, the linebacker position is super intriguing because, again, in a fast-paced, perhaps subbing in and out often league, we're not sure how it's going to look, but they've only got 4 linebackers on the roster. One of those 4 is a 31-year-old, 6-year NFL veteran, recently named a captain of the team in Steven Johnson. So if you're going to roll with 4 guys, one of them is going to be heavily relied upon, right? If you feel okay with only holding 4, that means to me that Steven Johnson is going to be the quarterback of the defense, obviously the leader of the defense, being named a captain. So I'm excited to see him, again, as a signal caller and getting people lined up, etc.
So the defensive backfield has had its share of turnovers ever since the draft, but they're settled now on their guys. What's your take on the DBs?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, the first 3 defensive backs that were drafted are no longer in Dragons uniforms, right? So I think they're going to be leaning on Coach Lopez quite a bit to make sure that these guys are up to speed and technique wise they're ready to go. I would assume at this point for me, out on the edges, that Steve Williams and Channing Stribling will probably be starters at that spot. Again, that would be my assumption.
Yeah, I'm assuming so also. Yep.
4 safeties that, there's a lot of talent there. And again, versatility, a common theme, but I'm curious to see how those safeties are used. I would venture to guess, at least early on in the year while you're, getting your feet wet and learning, to play alongside these guys, probably going to be a lot of, basic cover 2, maybe some man under, right? Stribling specifically is a pretty long guy, that can put his hands on you at the line of scrimmage. But, you want to avoid the big mistake early on. If you've got 25 seconds offensively to run a play, obviously you're going to be churning in and out. But if an offense gets into a rhythm, you don't have a lot of time to adjust defensively. And you've only got 2 timeouts to burn if you're a head coach per half.
Yep.
So if an offense gets rolling, you got to have the veteran leadership out there on the field to right the ship. Otherwise, it's going to be over pretty quick for you.
With the XFL rules, when those came out and we got the true insight to what kind of innovations they would be making, I immediately thought, this is going to be like hockey. Because you have 25 seconds in between the plays. So these defensive adjustments and personnel changes, they're going to happen kind of like line changes. You've got more yardage to the sideline, and you're not on skates going 30 miles per hour to get in and out of the play. So for me, I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be fast. And you're right, the defense they have their work cut out for them. So that's a great segue, because I want to talk to you about Week 1 now, because it's upon us. What's the forecast for Game 1? We got the Seattle Dragons going in to play the first ever XFL 2020 game against the DC Defenders.
Yeah, well, right off the bat, I mean, you got to feel for Seattle, right? I mean, they got their work cut out for them in a number of different ways. It's the inaugural game. You got to believe the crowd's going to be a factor in a hostile environment. You've got, by who some would surmise is one of the best, if not the best, potential quarterbacks in this league, in Cardale Jones, paired with a head coach in Pep Hamilton that knows his way around an offense. But, it's a cross-country flight, right? They went from Houston to Seattle. They've been training, in the rain for the last couple of weeks here in Seattle. You're going cross-country. It's 11 a.m., for your body clock being in the Pacific time zone. So definitely an adverse Week 1 scenario for them. Thankfully, it's not a divisional game for Week 1, but, I'm not looking for, really anything out of the ordinary, right? I want to know that, there's a firm grasp offensively on the playbook. I want to see Silvers get into a rhythm and distribute the ball as I think we're anticipating. I want to make sure, like I was saying earlier, that, there's not just obscene blown coverages, right? Just make it a competitive, difficult for both sides football game that we can enjoy. And, if it's a close game in the fourth quarter, I think that's what everybody's going to sign up for.
If you had to predict this game, I'll put you on the hot seat here, but you have to pick out of Seattle or Washington. Who do you see coming out with the W?
Well, this is a Dragons program, is it not?
It is.
And, this is a unique connection that we have with this team, right?
That's right.
We're diehard fans.
That's right.
Without ever seeing them play a down. So there's no way I'm going to pick against Seattle in Week 1. And so what I'll say is I think, there's a big trick play success with Keenan Reynolds over the course of the game. I think Trey Williams will bust a couple of runs, 20 or more yards. Maybe one of them goes to the house. And I think some pressure by somebody in the front four is going to force a turnover late in the game. And so I'm going to say, Seattle, let's do a weird score with all these different extra points, right? So I'm going to say, let's say Seattle 26, DC 23, something like that.
Wow, that would be exciting. One thing's for certain, we're going to see big plays this weekend. That's 100% certain. So, I too am part of the Dragons Kingdom. So I'm going to pick the Dragons to win. I actually think this game could kind of go offensive. Because you do have a lot of playmakers and speed on both sides of the ball. I might go 31-36. So let's move to game 2, which is LA at Houston.
Yeah, it's a divisional game out of the chute, so that's cool.
Yeah.
The sad thing is if Josh Johnson can't go, that takes a lot of the wind out of the sails, right, going in, for LA. So everything that you read, it's looking like it could be a game-time decision. It's not a foregone conclusion yet. If Josh Johnson is fully healthy, I think it's probably a close game. But, even if he does play, he's going to be banged up. So I'm going to go with the home team with the more surefire situation offensively. Houston and remember, Houston's been home this whole time during training camp too.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody kind of had to uproot their lives for a month. Houston was just hanging out and doing their thing at home during training camp. So I think early on they get an edge, and I would expect Houston actually pretty big in this game. The spread being 5.5. I think Houston by at least 10 points in this one.
I will say that I think the Wildcats have one of the most intriguing and possibly tenacious defenses. I think that Winston Moss, Coach Moss, who played some years here in Seattle. I watched him in the 90s. I remember him well. But you listen to him as a coach, I think he's a great motivator and obviously defensive-minded. They have a lot of talent on that side of the field. But a lot of people have talked about Houston's offense. And Houston's offense under June Jones is just expected to just be a big-time passing attack and scoring extravaganza. So I think this is definitely one of the most intriguing games of the weekend, simply because I think those two imposing forces are going to teach us a little bit about each team early. But I think I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I think the Wildcats sneak in there. They're able to score points, but I think that it's a big test. But I think that defense has enough talent to potentially tame this offense in week 1, especially before they find their rhythm. Because I like Houston. I think that they're going to be just fine this year. But this is a little bit of a trap game. So I'm going to go. I'll jump out on a limb. I don't live in Houston.
Okay.
I don't live in Houston or LA. So I think that. There's a lot of good food in Houston. I think they've been at home. Maybe they're just a little too comfortable, and I think they can get shocked. So I'll go LA putting up 29 points, and let's say we tame them at home for 24.
Okay, I'm gonna say Houston 30, and I'm gonna say LA 12.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a struggle for LA, just with the uncertainty at the quarterback position this early on. Yeah, 30 to 12, Roughnecks. That's what I'm going to go with.
So now Sunday morning, game 1, Tampa Bay Vipers at the New York Guardians.
I got to be honest. I'm really interested to see what Aaron Murray's got left, man. Here's a guy that, wasn't really, physically the most gifted guy, but won a lot of games at Georgia against really talented defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of, bounced around a little bit. He was a practice squad type guy, but he was a TV analyst, right? This is not a guy that was, plucked from a practice squad right onto an XFL roster. So I want to see what he's got left. And I think, for my money, you can use all the cliche words you want, hard working and all that, but I was always a big Matt McGloin guy. When he would win games with the Raiders, I would just scratch my head and say, how the heck is this guy doing it? So, again, early on, I'm looking at the quarterback position. I got McGloin over Murray, to knock the rust off sooner. New York is at home, so I'm going to say Guardians, 23, Tampa Bay 21.
Well, my quick take on these two teams is I happen to like both these rosters for different reasons, but I think that Tampa offensively and defensively have a lot of hidden gems on their roster. They have a lot of really potentially exciting players on both sides of the ball, but Aaron Murray had a rough go in Atlanta. He went through coaching changes. I think their offensive line eventually found some cohesion, but that took, half of the 8 games that we watched. And this is a different ball club. There's been consistency in coaching. I think Mark Trestman and others on the staff. I mean, you got the character on the defensive side, the DC Glanville. I mean, like there's some leadership that wasn't there in Atlanta. And he has a fresh start, but I'm with you. I'm maybe cautiously optimistic, but I'm a little apprehensive too because I want to see him do it. I like New York's defense, and I also really happen to like their offense. I think, Matt McGloin and Tim Cook and Mikael McKay and the list goes on with that team. This is a really good matchup, and I'm really Sunday morning. I'm going to be pumped. Get some coffee, settle in. This game's going to be very intriguing to watch, but I'll go New York. I think they're going to hold. They're on duty. They're going to hold their ground in New York, and they're going to they're going to come. Yeah, I have a 3-year-old, so I do puns. But they're in New York, and I think that this is going to be. Both defenses are pretty strong, so I'm going to go something on the low end with this one.
Okay.
I'll go. Let's go 15-22.
Okay.
So the final game of the week, St. Louis Battlehawks, Kaka, right? I mean, they're traveling in numbers, I'm sure, to Dallas in the renovated stadium. What do you see in this game?
I'm going to put it this way. I'm glad this is the last game of the weekend because hopefully the first 3 are just enthralling, exciting, down to the wire, maybe a little overtime action because I think this is going to be the biggest blowout of the weekend. I think, as much as I think Dallas is going to be, unfortunately, and it pains me to say it, as a Western Division foe here, to me, Dallas is the team to beat, man. I just, the coaching staff all the way down, Bob Stoops and Hal Mummy with that offense, that's going to be tough to prep for. They've got so many, Jazz Ferguson and the Dead. I mean, all these, they've got some weapons, man. And they're at home. And, St. Louis to me is, I think, there's not going to be that much of a difference, right, roster-wise, but probably more of one of the underwhelming rosters as you look through it. So I'm going to say Dallas at home wins very big. I think this one's going to be 31-9 Dallas.
Bob Stoops, that offense, that venue, I like them on both sides of the ball. They have a lot of offensive weapons. I'm a huge Jazz Ferguson fan. I was clamoring for him to stay in Seattle. I'm going to say right up, I'm going to pick the Renegades. However, I really like St. Louis's defense, and I really like their run game. I think that their run game could wear you out. And Jordan Ta'amu, I was scouting him last year before the NFL draft. I actually was a little surprised that he didn't get rostered, at least on a practice squad and protected for the future. He is still raw, so I don't know if he's going to come out there and shine. He has the ability to come out there and make big plays, big runs, big throws, and be a big factor in this game. I'm not going to predict that, though. I do think that St. Louis's defense is going to do a pretty decent job. I think they're going to try to wear him down with the run, but I think the Renegades they're going to pull ahead in the second half is the way I see this. And it's going to be a pretty respectable game for most part of the game. When we hit zeros in the fourth quarter, I think Dallas is going to stretch out the lead a little bit. And I think it's going to be like I'll go 20. But we'll see. We'll see. Ta'amu, if he shines, it's going to be a different ball game.
So the lowest odds, right? The longest odds of all 8 teams to win the championship. This is from DraftKings. Your Seattle Dragons.
No.
Plus 1,200. Seattle Dragons are plus 1,200. St. Louis is plus 1,000. So they're expecting, Vegas is, St. Louis and Seattle to be the cellar dwellers in the East and the West, respectively.
Wow.
And number 1 overall, their favorite, not by a whole lot, is Dallas. So they've got plus 350 odds on Dallas, followed by New York and then Tampa. So you can see why New York and Tampa is expected to be a close game. But yeah, how about that? Seattle has the lowest expectations, which all that means is we're going to shock the world, right?
Yeah, honestly, I think we are. And for our listeners out there, I said those odds. I don't really do much betting at all on gambling and that sort of thing. However, I saw the 3.5 wins on the season. You know, you're telling me the odds to take it all. Hey, if you're a gambling man or woman out there, like, look at those odds, put a little money down. You know, it's worth the risk because it's not that kind of risk. I can't agree with those numbers at all, looking at this roster and looking at the talent. And people also tend to underestimate Seattle out here in the Northwest market. It took us decades. The Kingdom was vibrating and rocking in the 80s. But it took until we got into CenturyLink that we were known for just being the loudest and the hardest place to play. Well, guess what? It's the same stadium. It's an acoustic bowl. So whether you fill up the whole bowl or 25, 30,000 like we're going to do in the season opener, that's hard to function in. And we're passionate up here, and we're going to create that edge for 5 of our 10 games. So, you know, take $5, take $10, take $20 if you're following DraftKings and that sort of play, because it's worth it. You know, let it ride a little bit. I feel like those odds are off, but that's why they play the game.
That's why they play. And you're Tampa Bay, you're Dallas, right? Because that's weeks 2 and 3 for Seattle. Those are both at home at CenturyLink. You've been in Texas and or Florida the entire time. Yep. And now you got to fly across the country for Tampa into Seattle in February, where these guys have been outside practicing in Memorial Stadium in the elements.
Yeah,
that's going to be a factor, man.
Yeah,
you got to factor that in.
That's right. And Tyler, like weather forecasts for people that don't know what we've been going through the past 4 to 6 weeks here in the Northwest. We're not getting heavy snow or anything like that, but we are having absolute downpours. Like, I'm not far from the rainforest here in Washington. The water is just coming down all day long in droves, and Seattle has had the most rain on record, and we're 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks, we're going to be a little over a week away recording this from the home opener. So
it's an underrated aspect that nobody's talking about, but we're talking about it because we're locked in, man.
Yep. Yeah, and it's all the mystical and magical. You can't quantify it, so we'll see what happens.
That's it, brother. That's it.
All right. Well, all right. So thanks for jumping on before Kickoff 2020. We're huge fans of the podcast and keep up the great work. But can you tell our listeners how they can follow you on social media and also the Dragons Weekly podcast?
Sure. Yeah. No. And even before I do that, the feeling is absolutely mutual. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah. You are one of the leading voices when it comes to, again, social media presence and podcasts, etc. with this team. So an honor for me to be on with you. But yeah, you can find us on Twitter. We're at Dragons Weekly. Instagram, we're there too, at Dragons Weekly Podcast. And we even have a Gmail account. Okay, so if you want to email us, you can send us an email, old school. We're all for it, and that's dragonsweeklypodcast@gmail.com. So we're all over the place. Find us, shoot us a follow. We are darn near close to 100 followers as of this recording on Twitter.
We need Dragon fans. Like, come out in droves. If you're following us on XFL End Zone, whatever platform, but especially like on Twitter, go to Tyler, go to the Dragons Weekly, follow them, dive in. They're a huge part of the Dragons family and a great voice. So, Tyler, we're going to sign off, but thank you so much. And one last thing, go Dragons.
Thank you. Go Dragons. Let's do this thing. It's finally here. We did it. We made it. Let's go.
Welcome to a new segment that we'll be featuring throughout the 2020 XFL season. Welcome to the Kingdom of Zorn. James Arthur Zorn was born on May 10th, 1953 in Whittier, California. He wore number 10 as the first ever quarterback in 1976 for the Seattle Seahawks. From 76 to 1984, he brought creativity and innovation to the role as a franchise quarterback with 100 starts, 20,182 passing yards, and 107 touchdowns as a Seattle Seahawk. Along with Russell Wilson, Matt Hasselbeck, and Dave Craig, he's a Seahawks legendary quarterback. In 1978, in his third season, he was a second-team All-Pro quarterback, leading a young Seattle franchise to the third best offense in the NFL. Jim Zorn is one of the only few Seahawks to make the Ring of Honor. He's been an NFL coach for 18 years, 2 as a head coach with the Washington Redskins. As a coach, he has worked with many high-profile quarterbacks, including Warren Moon, Matt Hasselbeck, Brad Johnson, Joe Flacco, Trent Dilfer, Frank Reich, John Kitna, Kyle Orton, and Charlie Batch, just to name a few. He has served as a coach under Mike Holmgren, John Harbaugh, Bobby Ross, and Dennis Green in the NFL. That's 18 years on the big stage. We're very excited to see General Manager and Head Coach Jim Zorn lead the Seattle Dragons. As a player and a coach, he boasts nearly 30 years of NFL experience. He was the first NFL quarterback that many Pacific Northwest fans fell in love with in the 70s and 80s, and it's a vast understatement to say that so many are so fired up about it. So hunker down, Seattle. The Dragons are coming. As they descend upon D.C., where a horde of battle-clad defenders await, the Kingdom of Zorn will make its first ever attempt to breathe fire into XFL 2020. Thank you for listening to Sea of Dragons XFL End Zone 2020.